Previously in the Six Pines series, I built a tiny motel/hotel whose owner had disappeared. He ran off into the forest saying he had proof of Bigfoot, and he was never seen again. Until now. Today, we're building the tiny treehouse where we found him on an expedition to discover Bigfoot with the Bigfoot Society. So, let's get started. We're building a diorama in 1 to 150th scale, which is basically in scale if you're a model train lover. We're starting off with some patterns that I made in Photoshop that have the texture for the walls and the windows and the roofs. This has been the best way that I've found through this series to make these textures happen, because at this scale, most of the materials that I could get my hands on are going to be way too big. I'm basically cutting out a bunch of different parts of the building and gluing them down to some cardboard, and then I'm going over them with the textures for the walls and the shingles. That way I have a little bit of dimension to them, but nothing too crazy. If you're new to the channel, right about now you might be asking yourself, what in the world is Six Pines? So Six Pines is a series that I've been doing on this channel where I'm building a tiny town, one diorama at a time. And in this town, there's a lot of interesting characters, and everybody is weirdly obsessed with Bigfoot. The main character of this diorama has been living in the forest for a few months now. He's been trying to live amongst the big feet and get some kind of proof to show town that he's not crazy and that they actually exist out here. So this treehouse is going to be made up of a bunch of different pieces of walls and buildings that he's come across that he has fashioned into a house for himself while he's living out here. For the other buildings that I've made in this series, I've created pattern pieces for the entire building because I knew how I wanted it to look in the end. With this treehouse, I used parts from all of those other buildings, but I only did a section here or there, just a wall of windows or one segment of a door, so that I could mix and match all of the pieces together to create the building. I made one main square section with a door and a window, and then I started trying to figure out how I wanted all of these pieces to fit together. I had to do a few alterations to some of the shapes, but in the end I was able to come up with this building. One of the most difficult materials to find for this scale of work is wood. We have a lot of stores here in LA that sell art and craft materials, but I think it'd be very difficult to find these if you don't live in a big city, because I even had trouble finding them here. So I'll try to find some links for you guys, and hopefully maybe in the future I can get a brand that I can work with specifically for getting this out to you guys easier, because I know I have trouble sometimes finding this wood. I wanted to add a little railing around the outside of the building. I'm using my X-Acto knife to chop up these little pieces of lumber, and then I'm gluing them down with gel super glue and using my tweezers to stick them in place. I like doing these kinds of abandoned buildings because I don't have to be super neat and keep it from getting messy, because the whole point is that it is messy and falling apart. Another material that I use a lot in my dioramas is metal wire. I was finally able to find some that was small enough to work in this scale by recycling it from the inside of an old broken power cord that I wasn't using any longer. I wanted to add bits of scrap metal to the building, but again, this scale is so challenging because what I would normally use is some corrugated cardboard and then either spray paint it or use some acrylic paint. With this being so small, I had to try and create that ridged texture. So I experimented with using paper and finding objects around the house that had ridges and trying to press it into the paper. I think the technique can definitely be improved, but I do like how it turned out with just wetting the paper and painting it and then pressing it onto a surface that had all of these ridges. I had to paint the paper first though, because when I tried to do it the other way around, the water in the paint kind of erased all of the ridges that were in it beforehand. I started adding dirt and grunginess to the building, and I did go over some of the metal pieces then a little bit later on after they had dried and been glued down, and they held up pretty well. I'm using acrylic paint for models to do all of this, and I'm just letting my heart guide me on where to put all of the dirt and griminess, but I was trying not to overdo it with the grunge, and actually at the end of the day I feel like I probably could have done more. I made a pattern for some little solar panels and then glued those down to some cardstock. They were missing something after I glued them in place, and I realized that they should be a little bit shiny. So I'm using some UV resin over the top of them to glaze them a little bit and give them more of a shiny texture. I think UV resin is literally my favorite tool that I use. I think I use it on every diorama, and I think I tell you guys that I use it on every diorama and love it. I kind of feel like that chef who was always using olive oil and she would be like, EVOO. Do y'all remember that lady? Okay, anyway, back to the build. It's time to make some of these trees that we put in every Six Pines diorama. It's literally in the name. We're gonna make these pine trees out of some wire. This is the scale or gauge of wire that I normally use. And I have broken down some sisal, I hope that's how you pronounce it, rope, and taken the fibers out. And that's what I'm using to twist into these trees. I thought I'd include at least showing you guys the process of making these trees, but I go into more detail in other videos in the Six Pine series, so if you want to see how to do that, you can watch those videos. Next, I'm building the base for the diorama. I'm using some of this pink insulation foam that I normally use when I want to create rocks because it's so easy. You can literally just break it up with your fingers and it already has like a rocky texture to it. It's basically my cheat code when I need to put down rocks or cliffs. I'm also cutting some stilts or legs to go underneath the tree house, and I guess that makes it not a tree house, but we're gonna keep calling it that. And I'm using some tiny rocks for fish tanks that I acquired from the 99-cent store. I'm gluing all of these rocks and things down using hot glue. Sometimes I use white glue or wood glue, and that probably would give me a little bit better coverage. I think it has in the past, but in this one, I tried some hot glue and it still worked. So it's cutting corners a little bit, but I like to have different ways of doing things in case I ever run out of like glue or there's some reason why I can't use one specific product. I'm also adding some of the tree trimmings, tree debris that I clipped off when I shaped the trees earlier. And now I'm painting on a highly unnecessary coat of Mod Podge mixed with some primer. Yeah, sometimes I just do things, guys. I guess that's just how art goes. But I did that with the idea that maybe I needed to prime all of this stuff because I was going to be using my airbrush to go over it. But instead of just putting the primer in the airbrush, I did this weird mixture. So don't worry about it if you're making your own diorama. I've loaded up my airbrush with some acrylic paints and I'm painting the ground a gray, rocky color and then going over everything, trees and all, with some brown acrylic paint. I wanted this one to be a lot more brown than the trees normally are in Six Pines, and that's because this is more of a dingy, dead part of the forest, but also I wanted it to match with the color scheme that I have going on for the treehouse. I'm gluing the treehouse down to the legs and I'm gonna add in one more ladder up to this place because otherwise how is anybody gonna get in here? But also I just want to take a quick second to say thank you to Inez E, KNZ, Grouchy Old Man, Fatal Gift, Pat M, Suki T, Lizzie B, Ryan R, Joe R, Julia S.D, Red C, Isaac W, Lori R, Gabriel K, and Awkward Burb. Thank you guys for being patrons of the Patreon, and shout out to every patron who's over there from free tier all the way up because it's really motivating to have you guys, and that's part of the reason why I still have a channel. The last little piece of our diorama that's missing is our tiny figure. I'm sculpting her out of some green stuff. I've been using this to sculpt people lately, and it works a lot better than the polymer clay that I've been using in the past. And I quickly sculpt a little person out of the green stuff and then paint her using some of the model color acrylic paint that I've been also using for my builds. Once I was done painting her, I super glued her in place, or I tried to. At first my idea was to have her falling off of this ladder that her and the bunch of explorers were trying to climb up, but then the super glue wouldn't stick to any of the ladders, so in the end I decided to put her on top of the building, and she's kind of celebrating finding this place and rescuing the person who's been living out here. We'll see what he has to say later in a future video, but for now, this is the finished build. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to see more videos in the 6 Pine series and figure out how we got to this point, you can check them out in this playlist. And if you want to subscribe to the channel for more videos, hit the subscribe button. YouTube will do its thing, and I'll see you in the next one.